The public image of Paul Newman has remained remarkably consistent across generations, serving as the ultimate blueprint for the classic Hollywood archetype. To the global audience, he was the fiercely charismatic actor with piercing blue eyes and seemingly unblemished marriage, and a philanthropic footprint that reshaped celebrity charity. For decades, this cinematic persona shielded his private existence from the aggressive scrutiny that typically dismantles the lives of major entertainment icons. However, the internal dynamics of the Newman household possessed a distinct reality that was significantly more layered, challenging, and human than any narrative projected on the silver screen. Today, his daughter Melissa Newman is progressively stepping forward to dismantle the glossy studio biography, offering an authentic glimpse into the intricate mechanics of their family life. Her reflections do not seek to diminish her father's substantial legacy, but rather to contextualize the profound vulnerabilities that existed beneath the monumental fame. By analyzing these deeply private family accounts, we gain a clearer understanding of a man who constantly wrestled with his own massive public identity. This investigative exploration reveals that the true essence of the Newman story lies not in a manufactured perfection, but in the deliberate, often difficult choices made behind closed doors. Growing up as the child of a global cinematic icon introduces a unique set of psychological and social complexities that few outside that environment can fully comprehend. For Melissa Newman and her siblings, their father was simultaneously an ordinary parent demanding domestic routine and a larger-than-life figure whose face adorned billboards worldwide. The household was consistently divided between the quiet, grounded atmosphere of rural Connecticut and the chaotic, high-stakes environments of active Hollywood film sets. This dual existence forced the children to navigate an unusual boundary line between absolute public exposure and a fiercely guarded domestic privacy. Paul Newman himself was acutely aware of the distorting effects that extreme celebrity could exert on developing children, and he actively sought to counter it. He established a home environment that intentionally minimized the intrusion of the entertainment industry, prioritizing simple outdoor activities, nature exploration, and strict personal accountability. Yet, despite these structural safeguards, the sheer magnitude of his fame during the 1960s and 1970s was an unavoidable force that shaped their daily lives. The constant presence of fan mail, trailing paparazzi, and industry executives served as a perpetual reminder that their father belonged to the world as much as he belonged to his family. To understand the specific environment in which Melissa Newman was raised, one must examine the intricate foundational structure of this large, blended family unit. Before building his celebrated life with actress Joanne Woodward, Paul Newman had been married to Jackie Witt, a relationship that produced his first three children, Scott, Susan, and Stephanie. The dissolution of that first marriage and his subsequent union with Woodward introduced immediate emotional complexities, establishing a household dynamic that required careful navigation. Together, Newman and Woodward expanded the family by welcoming three daughters, Elinor, Melissa, and Claire, thereby creating a complex network of half-siblings and shared histories. Managing the emotional undercurrents of a blended family is inherently difficult, but doing so under the intense glare of the Hollywood spotlight amplified every standard domestic challenge. Melissa has frequently noted that her parents were deeply committed to fostering an environment where all the children felt a sense of stability and belonging. They deliberately chose to base the family in Westport, Connecticut, a location specifically selected to serve as a geographic and cultural buffer against West Coast superficiality. This rural sanctuary allowed the children to experience a childhood anchored in regular chores, local schooling, and a profound connection to the natural world. Despite the deliberate efforts to maintain a conventional domestic routine, the reality of Paul Newman's global stardom was a massive factor that could never be entirely neutralized. During the peak of his career, Newman achieved a level of cultural saturation that Melissa later compared to the intense, modern fanaticism surrounding contemporary pop music superstars. This extreme level of public adulation meant that simple family outings often required careful logistical planning to avoid chaotic public scenes and aggressive fan encounters. The knowledge that their father was a premier box office draw and an international sex symbol created a strange disconnect within the minds of his young children. They saw a man who helped them with homework and spent weekends fishing, while the rest of the world saw an unreachable cinematic deity. Paul Newman handled this immense adulation with a characteristic skepticism that he actively sought to pass down directly to his children. He was deeply uncomfortable with the concept of hero worship and consistently refused to buy into the myth of his own inherent superiority. This grounded perspective became the cornerstone of his parenting philosophy, ensuring his children understood that public acclaim was not an accurate measure of human worth. A central theme that Melissa Newman emphasizes when analyzing her father's psychological makeup is his deeply ingrained perspective on the nature of personal success. Newman firmly believed that a vast portion of his legendary career was the direct result of sheer luck, timing, and biological circumstance. He frequently described his cinematic achievements not as a validation of unique genius, but as an accident of cultural tastes and physical genetics. This philosophical stance prevented him from developing the destructive ego that so often derails individuals who achieve such historic levels of wealth and fame. By viewing his monumental success through the lens of random fortune, he developed a profound, almost urgent sense of moral obligation to society. He instilled a foundational rule within his household: if fortune grants an individual more resources than they reasonably require, that individual possesses a non-negotiable duty to help others. This specific ideology was not merely discussed as an abstract concept, it was practiced openly and served as the driving force behind the family's future philanthropic endeavors. Melissa and her siblings grew up observing a father who viewed his immense wealth and global platform as a heavy social responsibility rather than a personal luxury. The public narrative surrounding the 50-year marriage of Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward has long been celebrated as Hollywood's ultimate unblemished romantic fairy tale. In an industry notorious for volatile relationships and high-profile divorces, their enduring partnership stood as an extraordinary monument to marital stability and mutual devotion. For decades, fans and media commentators pointed to their union as definitive proof that genuine, lasting love could successfully withstand the immense pressures of show business. However, when Melissa Newman began examining the extensive family archives for her biographical book, she uncovered a narrative that was far more authentic. The project, titled Head Over Heels, allowed her to comb through decades of private correspondence, uncovering the raw emotional reality behind the public myth. Instead of finding a sanitized, picture-perfect romance, she discovered a relationship defined by intense passion, creative friction, and a deeply human connection. The archived materials revealed that their longevity was not the result of effortless compatibility, but rather the product of continuous dedication and mutual respect. This archival exploration showed that their bond was strong enough to accommodate both their individual complexities and the intense demands of their respective careers. The initial discovery of her parents' early correspondence occurred entirely by chance, while Melissa was sorting through overlooked storage containers filled with discarded family items. Tucked away within these forgot personal effects was a substantial collection of intimate handwritten letters that Paul Newman had sent to Joanne Woodward. As she began reading the fragile pages, Melissa was initially struck by the immense tenderness, intellectual wit, and deep emotional vulnerability her father displayed. These letters offered a rare glimpse into the private thoughts of a young actor navigating the early stages of a profound, life-changing romance. However, as the correspondence progressed into the deeper phases of their relationship, the tone of the writing shifted into territory that was distinctly more candid. Melissa openly admitted that reading these specific sections caused her significant moments of hesitation and unexpected personal embarrassment as a daughter. The language transitioned from standard romantic prose into highly passionate, uninhibited declarations that revealed a fiercely intense physical and emotional attraction between her parents. This sudden exposure to the raw, unfiltered passion of her parents forced Melissa to pause and carefully evaluate how to handle such intensely private material. The explicit nature of certain passages within the letters presented a distinct editorial and personal dilemma for Melissa as she compiled the historical book. She found herself constantly balancing her responsibility as an objective family historian against her natural desire to protect her parents' private dignity. Some sections of the letters were so remarkably candid, playful, and emotionally uninhibited that they completely challenged the conventional, polite image of the couple. Melissa described these specific writings as wonderfully bawdy and naughtily provocative, emphasizing that while they were never vulgar, they were intensely private. There were numerous occasions where she read a passage, shook her head in sheer disbelief, and decided that the content was simply too intimate for public consumption. Despite these necessary exclusions, the letters clearly demonstrated that the marriage was anchored by an enduring physical passion that never faded with age. This discovery effectively dispelled the notion that their long union had settled into a comfortable, platonic companionship in its later years. By choosing to include a carefully selected portion of these letters, Melissa sought to show that true marital longevity requires a vibrant, deeply human connection. This authentic perspective on the couple's private life serves to contextualize one of the most surprising disclosures ever made regarding the inner workings of the Newman estate. In his deeply reflective, posthumous memoir, Paul Newman explicitly detailed the existence of a highly unconventional, private sanctuary within their Beverly Hills residence. He openly referred to this specific room as the central hub of their adult privacy, a space intentionally designed exclusively for intimate connection and shared laughter. The room had been personally styled and decorated by Joanne Woodward, who envisioned it as a necessary escape from the constant demands of family and career. According to Newman's own written accounts, the couple regularly retreated to this private space multiple times a week, completely indifferent to external opinions. They recognized that maintaining a healthy, enduring marriage required a dedicated boundary line that separated their roles as parents and public figures from their identities as lovers. When the explicit transcripts detailing this room were first brought to light by researchers, they generated a wave of surprise even among immediate family members. The revelation added a fascinating, decidedly modern layer to the public's understanding of this legendary Hollywood couple. The initial discovery of these highly candid memoir transcripts created a notable moment of hesitation among the publishers and the surviving members of the Newman estate. Everyone involved in the publication process was fully aware that revealing such an intimate domestic detail would instantly capture global media attention. There were initial discussions regarding whether it would be wiser to suppress this specific information to preserve the classic, dignified public image of the family. However, after extensive family deliberation, Melissa and her sisters ultimately decided that the passage must remain fully intact within the final book. They recognized that suppressing the detail would be a disservice to their father's explicit desire to leave behind an honest, unvarnished autobiography. The inclusion of this private detail served a larger narrative purpose, demonstrating that their parents' celebrated relationship was built on a foundation of genuine passion. It proved to the world that Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were not a bloodless, idealized Hollywood monument, but two real people who actively nurtured their romantic bond. By embracing this truth, the family allowed the public to appreciate the marriage for its authentic humanity rather than a manufactured perfection. Behind the romantic narratives and the immense philanthropic achievements, the internal history of the Newman family is also profoundly marked by devastating personal tragedy. Long before Melissa Newman began uncovering the joyful love letters and complex family histories, a catastrophic loss occurred that permanently altered the trajectory of her father's life. This defining sorrow was the untimely and tragic death of her older half-brother Scott Newman, who was the only son born to Paul Newman. Scott grew up under the immense, often crushing pressure of watching his father evolve into one of the most universally recognized cultural icons of the modern era. Navigating adolescence and early adulthood while bearing the name of a famous parent is an inherently isolating experience that carries a unique set of psychological burdens. Scott consistently struggled to establish a distinct personal identity that was entirely independent of his father's massive cinematic reputation and pervasive public shadow. He eventually attempted to carve out a space for himself within the film industry, working primarily as a stunt performer and taking minor acting roles. This path eventually led him to appear alongside his father in the classic disaster film, The Towering Inferno, an experience that brought both creative connection and intense personal scrutiny. The reality of Scott Newman's life away from the film sets was characterized by a painful, escalating battle with severe chemical dependency and emotional instability. His personal struggles were significantly compounded following a serious motorcycle accident that left him enduring intense chronic physical pain and long-term injuries. In his attempt to manage the relentless physical discomfort and the psychological weight of his life, Scott began relying heavily on potent prescription medications. Over time, this reliance on pharmaceuticals tragically merged with a severe alcohol addiction, creating a highly volatile and incredibly dangerous chemical dependency. This destructive downward spiral ultimately culminated in an absolute catastrophe within a Los Angeles hotel room, where Scott suffered a fatal drug and alcohol overdose. His sudden death at the exceptionally young age of 28 sent profound shockwaves through the entire structure of the extended Newman family. The loss was a catastrophic emotional blow that completely shattered Paul Newman's world, forcing him to confront a level of grief that no amount of fame could alleviate. This tragedy permanently dismantled any lingering illusions of domestic invulnerability, leaving an indelible mark of sorrow on the family's history. The sudden, violent loss of his only son plunged Paul Newman into a profound, lifelong state of intense psychological grief and unrelenting self-examination. Despite possessing a historic career, multiple Academy Awards, and vast financial wealth, Newman discovered that these achievements offered zero comfort in the face of parental tragedy. In the candid audio interviews recorded for his posthumous memoir, he openly expressed the deep-seated guilt that haunted his thoughts for the remainder of his days. He continuously questioned whether his own massive celebrity had inadvertently placed an intolerable amount of psychological pressure on Scott's developing identity. Newman agonized over the possibility that his famous on-screen persona had forced his son to adopt a destructive, hypermasculine bravado to feel validated. He confessed to frequently engaging in silent, internal dialogues, where he desperately sought his deceased son's forgiveness for his perceived parental shortcomings. He tormented himself with the thought that he had fundamentally failed to recognize the subtle, desperate signs of Scott's escalating emotional agony. This immense burden of personal guilt completely reshaped Newman's worldview, permanently altering how he approached his fame, his remaining children, and his ultimate purpose in life. In the painful aftermath of this immense family tragedy, Paul Newman and his children made a conscious collective decision to reject silent, isolated grieving. Instead of hiding their profound sorrow from the public eye, they chose to channel their immense pain into a direct, structured confrontation with addiction. Driven by a fierce determination to prevent other families from enduring similar heartbreaks, Newman used his resources to establish the Scott Newman Center. This pioneering organization was specifically designed to educate young people, medical professionals, and educators about the underlying dangers of substance abuse. The center focused heavily on developing evidence-based prevention programs that targeted the root causes of addiction rather than merely addressing the symptoms. Additionally, the foundation created specialized summer camp initiatives designed to support children whose families were actively being torn apart by substance abuse. Through this extensive, hands-on charitable work, Paul Newman attempted to transmute his agonizing personal guilt into a practical force for societal good. For Melissa and her sisters, this pivotal moment permanently redefined their understanding of what their family legacy truly required of them. When Paul Newman ultimately passed away at his beloved home in Connecticut, the global media immediately flooded the airwaves with glowing, idealized retrospectives of his extraordinary life. He was universally canonized as an irreplaceable cinematic titan, a flawless husband, and a historic philanthropist whose corporate charity model had revolutionized modern giving. His unique salad dressing and organic food enterprise, Newman's Own, had successfully funneled hundreds of millions of dollars directly into global nonprofit organizations. This unparalleled business model had solidified his reputation as a secular saint who had successfully conquered Hollywood while maintaining an unblemished moral compass. However, beneath this pristine public narrative, the years immediately following his death introduced significant internal friction within the newly decentralized family structure. The departure of the family's patriarch left a massive leadership vacuum that naturally tested the complex relationships between his surviving children from two distinct marriages. Each of the 6 remaining siblings carried their own unique personal history, emotional perspective, and individual interpretation of how their father's immense legacy should be maintained. The challenge of transitioning from a father-led dynamic to a collaborative sibling partnership quickly exposed deep-seated philosophical differences regarding the future of the estate. The primary responsibility shared by the surviving Newman siblings was the preservation and careful management of the massive philanthropic network their father had spent decades constructing. This charitable empire was not merely a financial asset, it was the physical manifestation of Paul Newman's deepest moral convictions regarding social equity. Central to this network was the Hole in the Wall Gang Camps, a visionary initiative designed to provide transformative summer experiences for children facing life-threatening medical conditions. Newman had poured an immense amount of his personal time, physical energy, and emotional heart directly into these specialized medical camps. He routinely visited the facilities, completely stripping away his Hollywood stardom to act as an ordinary camp counselor who told jokes to sick children. For these young campers, he was never an Academy Award-winning celebrity. He was simply a kind, funny older man who made them feel normal amidst their medical crises. Following his passing, the siblings found themselves under immense pressure to ensure that this pure, uncompromised spirit of grassroots generosity was not lost. They were acutely aware that the world was watching to see if the family's famous commitment to altruism would survive without its founder's direct guidance. As the financial scale and administrative complexity of the Newman's Own foundation continued to expand, significant institutional disagreements began to surface among family members. The most public and emotionally charged conflict emerged when Melissa's older sisters, Susan and Elinor Newman, took formal legal action against the leadership of the foundation. This unprecedented lawsuit sent shockwaves through the philanthropic community, as the Newman name had long been synonymous with absolute domestic harmony and unified purpose. The legal complaint alleged that the current executive leadership of the foundation was deliberately drifting away from the explicit charitable intent of its founder. The sisters argued that funding decisions were being directed toward corporate agendas that failed to reflect their father's authentic, lifelong passions. They contended that their father had always intended for his children to maintain a direct, hands-on voice in steering the distribution of charitable funds. The legal dispute sought to protect the foundation's core identity, demanding that resources be strictly redirected to the grassroots causes Paul Newman originally championed. This complex legal battle highlighted the immense difficulties that naturally arise when a highly personal family legacy transitions into a massive corporate entity. The emergence of this internal legal battle presented a fascinating study in contrast for cultural observers who had bought into the myth of the perfect Hollywood family. Seeing the children of Paul Newman engaged in a public dispute over the administration of his estate forced a reality check regarding the nature of celebrity legacies. After a period of intense private negotiations and emotional strain, the sisters ultimately made the decision to withdraw the lawsuit, bringing the public conflict to a quiet termination. Although the legal battle was successfully resolved away from the courtroom, the episode left a lasting impression on all the family members involved. It served as a stark, powerful reminder of the immense weight and responsibility associated with managing a legacy that has become larger than life. The conflict proved that protecting a deceased parent's ideals requires a continuous, often painful process of communication, compromise, and shared vulnerability. For Melissa and her siblings, the resolution of this crisis allowed them to refocus their collective energies on the core human values that define their father's true character. In the decades that have steadily accumulated since Paul Newman's passing, Melissa Newman has gradually embraced her role as a vital custodian of the unvarnished family history. While the global film community will eternally celebrate her father through cinematic retrospectives of his iconic film roles, Melissa remains focused on a different narrative. She continuously works to ensure that the public understands the deeply human man who existed entirely independent of the red carpets and industry accolades. In her frequent public speaking engagements and written works, she consistently returns to the foundational themes of humility, luck, and social obligation that governed his life. Melissa views her artistic and literary projects not as tools for celebrity worship, but as honest historical records designed to humanize two complex individuals. Her carefully curated book allowed the public to step past the polished studio marketing and appreciate the genuine work required to sustain a lifelong creative partnership. By presenting her parents as flawed, passionate, and deeply dedicated human beings, she offers a narrative that is far more instructive than any idealized Hollywood myth. The continuing narrative of the Newman family is currently being written by the surviving daughters, each of whom has discovered a unique path to honoring their father's memory. The youngest sibling, Clee Newman, has taken on a highly visible public role, serving as a dedicated global ambassador for the network of children's medical camps. Her active, hands-on involvement ensures that the core philosophy of joy, community, and specialized care remains at the absolute center of the organization's international expansion. Meanwhile, her older sister Eleanor has focused her life's work on promoting environmental sustainability and organic agricultural initiatives, directly reflecting their father's pioneering work in eco-conscious business. Melissa has deliberately chosen the path of the artist, educator, and intimate storyteller, using her creative talents to preserve the delicate, authentic nuances of their shared domestic history. When analyzing her father's massive impact on the world, Melissa consistently emphasizes that his greatest achievement was never recorded on celluloid. She firmly believes that Paul Newman's true, enduring legacy is found in the thriving communities he constructed, the grieving families he supported, and the millions of individuals he inspired to look beyond themselves. Fame may have granted Paul Newman his global platform, but his profound, intentional generosity is what ultimately gave his life an enduring, meaningful significance.